The 1971 Ford Pinto, the car that literally exploded. The Ford Pinto wasn't just a bad car. It was a rolling death trap that Ford knew would explode and decided to sell it anyway. Ford's brilliant idea was to create a cheap, compact car to compete with Japanese imports. But in their rush to cut costs, they made one tiny mistake. They put the gas tank directly behind the rear bumper with zero protection. Here's the kicker. Ford engineers knew this design would cause the car to burst into flames during rear-end collisions, but they calculated it would be cheaper to pay off wrongful death lawsuits than to fix the problem. We're talking about an $11 fix per car that Ford refused to implement because it would hurt their profit margins. The result? A car that turned fender benders into funeral arrangements. The Pinto became so notorious for exploding that it practically invented the phrase automotive recall. But hey, at least it was affordable, right up until the moment it tried to barbecue you alive. The Pontiac Aztek, the SUV that killed a brand. If you've ever wondered what happens when a car company lets a committee of blind people design an SUV, meet the Pontiac Aztek. This thing was so aggressively ugly that it made people question whether Pontiac's designers had ever actually seen a car before. The Aztek looked like someone took a normal SUV, put it in a blender with a camping tent and a plastic storage container, then glued the pieces back together in the dark. It had more plastic cladding than a fast food restaurant in proportions that would make a circus funhouse mirror jealous. But here's the real embarrassing part. Pontiac was so confident in this disaster that they spent millions on advertising, calling it quite possibly the most versatile vehicle on the planet. The only thing versatile about the Aztek was its ability to be ugly from every possible angle. The car was such a commercial failure that it single-handedly destroyed Pontiac's reputation and helped kill the entire brand. Nothing says, "We've given up," quite like designing a vehicle that looks like it was assembled from spare refrigerator parts. The AMC Pacer, the goldfish bowl on wheels. The AMC Pacer was what happened when car designers decided that what America really needed was a vehicle that made passengers feel like they were trapped inside a giant fishbowl. AMC's brilliant marketing pitch was the first wide small car, which is about as contradictory as it sounds. This bubble-shaped monstrosity had windows so massive that driving it felt like sitting in a greenhouse during a heat wave. The glass was so oversized that it made up nearly half the car's weight, turning what should have been a lightweight compact into a rolling anchor. But wait, it gets worse. The Pacer was originally designed for a rotary engine that AMC scrapped at the last minute, leaving it with an underpowered inline-six that struggled to move all that glass around. It was like trying to power a house with a flashlight battery. The final result? One door was longer than the other for easier back seat access, which just made it look even more lopsided than it already was. The Pacer didn't just fail, it failed so spectacularly that it became the poster child for everything wrong with American car designs in the 1970s. The Yugo GV, the car that made walking look appealing. The Yugo wasn't just a bad car. It was so catastrophically terrible that it redefined what it meant to be unreliable. This Yugoslavian import was marketed as an affordable alternative to Japanese cars. But what buyers got was essentially a four-wheeled joke that broke down more than it started. The Yugo's build quality was so poor that some dealerships had to fix them before they could even be sold. We're talking about brand new cars that arrived at dealerships already falling apart. The doors didn't align, the paint peeled off if you looked at it wrong, and the engine had the reliability of a coin flip. But here's the best part. The Yugo was so slow that it struggled to merge onto highways. With a whopping 55 horsepower, it had less power than most lawnmowers and about the same top speed. Driving a Yugo wasn't transportation. It was an endurance test to see how long you could tolerate mechanical failure. The car became such a punchline that comedians built entire careers making Yugo jokes. When your car becomes synonymous with piece of junk in the public consciousness, you know you've achieved something truly special in the world of automotive disasters. The DeLorean DMC-12, the time machine that couldn't go anywhere. Take away the Back to the Future fame, and you're left with a car that was about as functional as a chocolate teapot. The DeLorean looked incredible with its stainless steel body and gull-wing doors. But actually driving one was like piloting a very expensive paperweight. Under the futuristic exterior was a pathetic 130 horsepower V6 engine borrowed from Renault. This thing had the acceleration of a sedated turtle and all the performance of a shopping cart with a broken wheel. We're talking about a sports car that got outrun by minivans on a regular basis. The stainless steel body that looks so cool in movies was actually a nightmare in real life. It showed every fingerprint, water spot, and scratch, making it impossible to clean. Plus, all that steel made the car heavier than it needed to be, which didn't help the already pathetic performance. But the real kicker was the quality control. Early DeLoreans were built so poorly that some couldn't even start right off the assembly line. Imagine dropping $25,000 on a futuristic sports car only to find out it's basically an expensive lawn ornament that occasionally makes engine noises. The Chevrolet SSR, the pickup truck that forgot how to truck. The Chevrolet SSR was what happened when GM's designers asked themselves, what if we took a pickup truck and made it completely useless as a pickup truck? The result was a retro-styled convertible that couldn't haul anything heavier than groceries and cost more than most luxury cars. This thing had a truck bed so small you couldn't fit a bicycle in it, let alone actual truck stuff. The convertible hardtop took up so much space that the bed was basically decorative. It was like buying a hammer that couldn't hit nails. Technically, it looked like the right tool, but it completely missed the point. The SSR weighed over 4,700 pounds, which made it heavier than most full-size pickup trucks, but it could barely carry 1,000 pounds without bottoming out. So you got all the fuel economy of a truck with none of the utility, plus the added bonus of a soft top that turned your truck into a bathtub every time it rained. Chevrolet marketed this disaster as a sport truck, but the only sport it was good for was emptying your bank account. At $42,000, you could buy a real truck and a real sports car and still have money left over for therapy to recover from seeing an SSR on the road. The Hummer H2, the military vehicle that went to suburbia. The Hummer H2 is what happened when soccer moms decided they needed a vehicle capable of invading a small country just to pick up groceries. The civilian version of a military truck was so ridiculously oversized that it made regular SUVs look like compact cars. At over 6 feet wide and weighing nearly 6,500 pounds, the H2 was basically a small building on wheels. It was so massive that it couldn't fit in most parking spaces, drive-through lanes, or garages. Owning an H2 meant redesigning your entire life around a vehicle that treated city streets like an obstacle course. The fuel economy was so bad, it was practically a crime against nature. We're talking about 10 miles per gallon on a good day, which meant a trip to the gas station became more expensive than most people's mortgage payments. The H2 didn't just drink gas, it chugged it like a frat boy at spring break. But here's the really embarrassing part. Despite looking like it could climb Mount Everest, the H2 was actually built on a Chevy Tahoe frame and had less off-road capability than most pickup trucks. It was all show and no go, like hiring a bodybuilder who turns out to be afraid of their own shadow. The Plymouth Prowler, the hot rod that wasn't hot. The Plymouth Prowler looked like it was built for drag racing, but it had the performance of a minivan having an identity crisis. This retro-styled roadster was supposed to capture the spirit of 1930s hot rods, but somehow managed to be slower than the cars it was trying to imitate. Under that aggressive-looking hood was a V6 engine borrowed from a Plymouth minivan. Yes, you heard that right. A car designed to look like a street racing machine was powered by the same engine that hauled soccer teams around suburbia. It produced a whopping 214 horsepower, which was embarrassing, even by the late 1990s standards. The Prowler's weird proportions made it look like someone had stretched a normal car on a medieval torture device. The front wheels were tiny, the rear wheels were massive, and the whole thing looked like it was designed by someone who had only heard hot rods described over a bad phone connection. But the real insult was the transmission. It only came with an automatic. Nothing says high-performance street rod like a slush box transmission that took away any chance of actually having fun driving the thing. It was like building a motorcycle and only offering it with training wheels permanently attached. The Cadillac Cimarron, the luxury car that wasn't. The Cadillac Cimarron was what happened when Cadillac decided to take a cheap Chevy Cavalier, slap some leather seats in it, stick a Cadillac badge on the front, and pretend it was a luxury car. It was an automotive fraud disguised as premium engineering. This disaster nearly destroyed Cadillac's reputation overnight. Customers walked into dealerships expecting luxury, and instead got a glorified economy car with a fancy nameplate. It was like ordering a filet mignon and getting a gas station hot dog served on a paper plate with delusions of grandeur. The Cimarron's 88 horsepower four-cylinder engine made it slower than most riding lawnmowers. We're talking about a luxury sedan that got beaten in drag races by actual sedans driven by retirees. The performance was so pathetic that Cadillac owners started looking at Buicks with envy. But here's the really insulting part. Cadillac charged luxury prices for what was essentially a Chevy with pretensions. Buyers paid premium money for a car that fooled absolutely nobody. You could spot a Cimarron owner from a mile away by the look of crushing disappointment on their face every time they had to explain why their Cadillac sounded like a sewing machine. The Pontiac Fiero, the sports car that spontaneously combusted. And finally, we reach the crown jewel of automotive stupidity, the Pontiac Fiero. This mid-engine sports car looked promising on paper, but in reality, it had one tiny problem. It kept catching fire, and by tiny problem, I mean it was literally a rolling fire hazard that turned parking lots into crime scenes. The Fiero's engine was mounted directly behind the driver, which sounds sporty until you realize that Pontiac forgot to include adequate cooling. The result was an engine that ran so hot it could literally melt its own connecting rods. When that happened, oil would spray all over the scorching hot engine bay and, surprise, turn your sports car into a four-wheeled barbecue grill. General Motors received so many reports of Fieros bursting into flames that they had to issue multiple recalls. We're talking about a car so dangerous that the fire department started keeping extra foam on standby whenever they spotted one on the road. Nothing says sports car excitement quite like wondering if your daily commute will end with a call to your insurance company and the local fire marshal. The really tragic part is that later model Fieros were actually decent cars once Pontiac figured out that engines shouldn't operate at the temperature of molten lava. But by then, the damage was done. The Fiero's reputation was literally up in smoke, and Pontiac killed the entire project rather than try to convince people that their sports car had stopped being a fire hazard. So there you have it, 10 cars so monumentally stupid that they make you appreciate whatever you're driving right now, even if it's held together with duct tape and false hope. From exploding Pintos to fire-breathing Fieros, these automotive disasters prove that sometimes the worst ideas make it all the way to production.